see your mother. You were only given one, go see your mother. And you know that you will never have another. Go see your mother, go see your mom.
Okay.
Welcome to Jewish Boy Calls His Mother. I'm your host, Sadia, and this is my mother, Ima. Hey, Ima.
Hey, sweetheart. So what are we doing for Thanksgiving Day today?
We'll have a Thanksgiving dinner
Yes.
/ lunch with my sister and a bunch of other people, and hope they'll be successful. What's funny is actually the previous episodes, I didn't realize I labeled them the same name like 2 years in a row for Thanksgiving. I called it Gobble Gobble, and then I had to change the title because I didn't want to just repeat the same thing. The main topic I was hoping we could talk about would be the an inconvenient parent making more independent children. And what I mean by that is if you look at the statistics of children learning how to potty and go to the bathroom on their own, the age is rising because the convenience that we have of diapers is just a whole lot easier than trying to train a child. And what's funny is back in the day, they made sure their kids were potty trained sooner rather than later because there was cloth diapers and it was just more inconvenient.
Yes.
And that if a parent's more inconvenient and you push them into a corner where they'd rather have their independence and not deal with the situation, they will find a way to raise their child to be independent, which is healthy for them in the long run. That's the main essence of that. And I was curious enough to know if you had any thoughts on it or any examples that you experienced when you were younger as a child and also when you were a parent.
I know that is true that during the day of cloth diapers with my parents' generation when they were babies, toilet training was very, very much pushed because especially in a lot of families in those days, the 1920s, a lot of laundry was still done by hand with a washboard.
Wow.
And in the 1930s, they came up with the electric agitators, which were the precursor to the present day washing machine, where it was just an agitator and there was a wringer. You could probably look this up on YouTube and see antiques of the old agitators. But the agitator, it was finally run by electricity, and the agitator and the water, would mix up everything, and then you had to by hand put the wet laundry in this big. They looked like two rollers with a crank, and you put the wet laundry, like just a few garments at a time, into these two rollers, and then you cranked it yourself to get the water out. Then just basically most people hung their clothes up outside because electric dryers didn't come about or weren't perfected or weren't readily available to the public until, again, like around the 1950s, 1960s. I remember my mother always hanging up laundry all the time hanging up laundry. And I've been in situations where I didn't have access to a washing machine. And my first reaction in those situations was, oh my God, what am I going to do? And I said to myself, wait a minute, you have two hands. Wash your clothes out by hand with soap and water and hang them up. And that's what I did in those situations. But the funny thing was, I didn't initially, it took me a few minutes to actually think of the idea that I could actually wash out my clothes myself by hand and hang them up. Because you're used to a washing machine and dryer. It's like you're not used to functioning without those things.
Yeah, I think I remember some times when I was younger, I was in camp and I had these socks and I only had a certain amount of socks, and basically it was a whole deal because I was scared into not using the laundry program at the camp because then I'd lose the clothing that I had.
Yes.
So I wound up just not having socks, and then I tried to clean them And as I cleaned them, I ruined the elasticity. And then I had to be, at one point, it was Erev Shabbos, and I was wearing just really wet socks for Shabbos. And then I developed eczema on my feet
Oh,
because
no.
I stopped wearing socks because I ran out of socks because I wasn't using the laundry. And it was a whole massive,
You've got a very good point. I've had camping experiences where I don't know what the problem is with camp, but clothes in camp get lost like crazy. And I often thought to myself, if I were in charge of a camp, what I would do. If I were in charge of a camp, I would get a big bin with a washboard for each bunk, and we would make washing your own laundry an activity and hang them up and put a string across the bunk. Everyone just wash out your clothes by hand, hang them up, and that's it. That way nothing gets lost.
Yeah, I don't.
And the kids get a lot of arm power. I mean, when you wash your own laundry with those washboards, you were scrubbing with your arms. You're getting a lot of exercise.
That sounds like a great idea.
Yep.
So, out of curiosity, back to what I was saying before, and what about when you were younger? That your parents, the word is neglectful, but like I'm not trying to make it negative, but it helped you become a more independent and more self-reliant person.
Let me see, more self-reliant individual.
For example, if like
basically trying to escape my parents' control.
So they're controlling this helped you become more independent.
Yes. Because I had to sneak around them to do the things I wanted to do. I was one of these kids where if my parents said no to me, that just meant I had to sharpen my wits to go behind their backs better, so I don't get caught.
Interesting. So
yeah, I thought when I came across friends of mine in high school or in junior high that were crying that they couldn't do something because their parents wouldn't let them, I would say to myself, are those kids crazy? You mean you're not doing something just because your parents say no?
Can you give me an example of what you did, like to get around your parents when they told you couldn't do something?
I used to like to hike a lot when I was little, like 5, 6 years old. We had woods around our area, really pretty woods, and I used to like to hike by myself through the woods, and I would just sneak out of the house and run away to the woods and play there during the day or go to the golf. We had a golf course, so I would go to the golf course, walk around the golf course, which was very nice.
How do they know that you weren't missing?
They saw I was gone.
They just couldn't. Back in the day, there was no cell phones. They couldn't find you.
Right. Oh, in those days, no cell phones, man. You wanted to lose yourself, you could. No way people could find. There was a good way of people not finding you. But we're going back to like toilet training, and my parents' generation. My parents raising us. They were very, very active in toilet training. And as a matter of fact, if you had an accident, you actually got spanked.
Interesting.
As a matter of fact, there was a movie where this little boy is sitting with his mother, and it was one of these like 1960, 1959 crazy, stupid, romantic movies. And this man is trying to pursue this woman, and he's dressed in a white suit. And this is in, I think, the Bahamas by the beach. And he actually goes into the water in his suit to approach her. And when he goes back to his hotel, he's walking through the hotel and the bottoms and his pants are totally wet. And this little boy sitting with his mother sees him walking through the hotel lobby. And he says to his mother, "Mommy, is that man going to get spanked?" Because that's how common spanking your kids for having accidents was in those days. Now, when it came to raising you children, my idea was not to make an issue of toilet training, just to leave you alone and don't worry. You kids, unless you kids have a serious medical problem, in which event I should approach the doctor and, see if there's medical intervention that's necessary. A normal kid will just train themselves, leave them alone. They'll take off the diaper, they'll go to the bathroom. And when you see that they're taking off the diaper and going to the bathroom by themselves in a consistent way, so then, you introduce them to these nice kids, underpants for girls, like pretty pants, flowers for boys, Superman, trucks, cars, airplanes, And your father and I disagreed on that. I told you about the incident with Etty when she was a baby.
No.
Okay, here's what happened. she said she was still in diapers. And I forgot how old she was. She had to be maybe 18 months, 2 years, maybe 18 months, something like that. And I was upstairs busy with something. I was busy with something. And she was downstairs with your father. And she told your father that she had to go to the bathroom. So your father, in the mood of excitement, runs up the steps with her. As he gets to the top of the steps, he whips off her diaper to put her on the toilet, not realizing that the diaper was already dirty. The contents of the diaper came off in his.
Oh, that's so lovely.
I started laughing myself. Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy.
So my question then is, you said something very interesting, and I kind of want you to elaborate on that. You said you waited for the child themselves to take off their diapers and try to use the toilet.
Yes.
So did you never tell them about the toilet? Like, what did you do?
We had a little potty, a little child's potty in the bathroom. And the only thing I would do is when I would give you kids a bath. A lot of times the warm water of the bath can cause urination. So I would say to your sisters, I would go, "Your Royal Majesty, time to sit on the throne." And I would put your kids on the potty, and then I would take the bath towel because you were all wet. I said, "Your Majesty, can you hear me? Your Majesty."
I can hear you fine. I'm just listening to you.
"Your royal robe," and I would put the towel around you, and then I would take a smaller towel for your head, which was wet, and I would say, "Your crown, Your Royal Majesty," and I would put the smaller towel on your head, and I would start to sing.
I'm curious enough for you to elaborate more, not so much on I guess toilet training. It seems like you kind of let them, your kid, my brothers and sisters and me, just eventually just figure it out themselves, almost like you didn't really tell them anything.
I didn't think it was good. I didn't think it was psychologically good to draw a lot of attention to it, which it probably isn't. But one of you, I'm not going to say, of course, I'm not going to say who, but there was one of you that up until that about 8 years old was still having problems with bedwetting. Mm-hmm. And I approached the doctor, and evidently it was a medical problem, which I assumed it was by that point. I didn't chastise him. I didn't punish nothing, I said, evidently you've got a problem. Talk to the doctor. And the doctor gave him pills. When he didn't want to take the pills. So when he was home, he didn't mind having diapers just to sleep in, mm-hmm. Because it was just like he and I, we were the only people that knew about it. It wasn't anybody else's business. But then he started to get invited to sleepover parties, to sleepovers. And so for sleepovers, he would use the pills. He would tell me himself that for the sleepovers, he wanted to use the pills. I said, fine, no problem.
So were there any other, I guess, parts of child rearing that you felt, most people would think that you'd have to really put an emphasis on or elaborate on or have all sorts of games on, but you decided to let it naturally play out? I'll give an example that I just realized now with my kid. He was having problems picking himself up and crawling. He was doing the army crawl everywhere. And the PT was saying that we need to get him to really lift up his body. So there's like all sorts of random stuff where like you take, a rolled up towel, you lift them up, you do these things. And I thought to myself to just put it into a necessity. So I put him on the porch. It was concrete. He tried army crawling. It didn't work. It hurt. He got up and started regular crawling. And ever since then, learning how to regular crawl.
That sounds good.
So was there anything like that did you do?
Well, as far as like when you kids were starting to, your hand, like motor coordination, gross motor coordination, fine motor coordination. In those days, there wasn't really the tendency for intervention unless it got to a point where the kid was, say, way beyond what they should not be doing at that point. Like, God forbid a kid was, say, 2 years old, not walking. Then that required real intervention, such as, physical therapy. But as far as like babies were concerned, we kind of like, if a kid was a little late on walking, but not very late, no problem. They eventually would catch up. There was not too much intervention at that time. One of the things that parents, so I've noticed a lot of parents will pay a lot of attention to and intervene with is eating habits. And I decided that it wasn't healthy to intervene in eating problems. Like I've seen parents at the table where kids can't leave the table unless everything's finished on their plate. Kids must eat their string beans. I'm going to watch you and I'm going to make sure you eat 5 string beans. After you eat 5 string beans, then I'm going to let you, I never thought that's a healthy way to get a kid to eat healthy. I felt that the best thing to do was you prepare a healthy dinner, you prepare a healthy snack, regular fruits and veggies, put them out on the table, and just don't look. If they're hungry, they're going to eat. Just leave them alone. And the only thing I didn't, and I remember somebody asked me that they noticed that you kids can eat a lot of fruits and vegetables. And I said, how did you get your kids to eat their vegetables? And I said, what I did at dinner was I would make a big salad for myself. And I would sit down and I would start eating this big salad or this big bowl of vegetables. And you kids would come over and say, Ema, can I have some? Sure, here, you can try it. And that's basically what worked. The only thing I was a stickler about was I would ask you kids, I never mind your kids snacking.
Yeah.
Because we're all underweight. So I didn't mind you snacking. But when you would come up from school, I would say, please, before you grab a snack, ask me what's for dinner. Because like if I'm in the middle of preparing fleishik that we're going to eat now, and you grab some cheese, then, we've got to wait 45 minutes now. Or if I'm preparing milks for dinner and you come in and you grab a hot dog out of this refrigerator, now what are you going to do for dinner? You got to wait 6 hours, I said, just please ask me when you come home what dinner so that you can snack accordingly. One time my mother was there and she knows your kids coming home from school and grabbing, food out of the refrigerator. She goes, you let them eat so close to dinner time? I said, Mom, my kids are all underweight. I'm happy they're eating, please.
Did you notice anything from your friends or family, how they raised their kid, and you're like, that's a good idea, and you took it?
That's a very good question. One of my friends was very patient with her kids. She would do a lot of talk. It's not like with me. I have a tendency to shoot first and ask questions later. If I get excited. I get excited quickly, and she didn't. She was able to hold her cool with her kids, and when I saw the way she did that, that was a good example for me to follow. And basically holding your cool. Don't flip your what.
So another thing I wanted to talk about, which I think was very funny, I was reading a story to my child, and it was one of those old Hasidic story books, and it was for children, so it wasn't for adults. It had pictures and for kids, and it was talking about a story of this from man and his son running a bookbinding company, and one of the workers there was a drunk. He was very good, made a lot of good money, but would waste all of his money on booze. And one day, he went ahead and drank himself into a stupor and hung himself. And when they found the body, the opposition, the Enlightenment movement Jews pinned it on the from man and his son.
Yes, I remember hearing it was a true story. Sure.
It's a true story, but this is a kid's story. I'm just trying to reiterate that. This is a kid's story.
Yeah, I know.
And then they get thrown into Russian prison. They have a trial. The judge sentenced them to 30-something years in Siberia. And the punishment before Siberia is you have to walk through 300 soldiers and that will whip them, and they have to cross the line. When I think the father was walking, or the son was walking, he dropped his yarmulke. So he didn't move until someone picked up his yarmulke. But during that time, he was still being whipped. And eventually, they went ahead and they went to Siberia. And only when the Tsar died, were they able to come back home. Now, that's a child's story for bedtime.
I know.
It's an interesting concept in Judaism, or at least from Judaism, I noticed, where harsh stories like that are just very nonchalantly talked about. Did you have the original understanding of that when you read stories like that to me and the rest of the family?
Like I'll tell you, there was sometimes where it was. I know what you mean. It was like there was a dichotomy. On one hand, this is the way the story really went, and especially like you say in Judaism, it's sad to say there are so many Jewish stories like that that are more of a
Note.
somber or violent.
Yeah.
And how we reconcile that with our kids is. How did you feel about the story when I read that to you? How did you feel about it?
When I was, and this is how I had a conversation I had with Ruthie, where I didn't mind it as a child. I thought it was interesting, it was adventurous, and it gave realism to my life as a Jew, so that nowadays when things are like that are happening, I'm not surprised, I'm not flustered by it. I'm more of accepting it and trying to find ways to, preserve myself and my family. That being said, she did bring up a point that, she was telling me she spoke with someone who had this experience where they had to go to a psychiatrist or a therapist when they were a little kid. And the psychiatrist, I think she was like 10 or 11, told her like, "Oh, do you think of killing yourself?" And it didn't enter the woman told Ruthie, it didn't enter her mind that to kill herself. She just felt sad and upset. But because this therapist put it in her head, then she herself, "Oh, I can do that. That's a possibility." Stories like that have suicide and death, it exposes a child to an option they didn't really think it existed. But it's also similar to, I know we had this conversation a while ago about, the story of Purim, when people, parents tell their kids, some people say like, "Oh, Haman just want to hurt the Jews real bad." They don't say they want to wipe them all off and massacre them, But like, at what point do you tell your child what's going on? Because
That's a very good question. I know. There's when I was a kid, our parents, when we were taught in Hebrew school about Purim, they didn't hold back. They told us, that Haman Mamish wanted to kill all the Jews. In fact, there was a song that we sang about it from Purim. It went, Haman had a plan to kill all the Jews, but Mordechai collected all the clues. Then Haman was a scoundrel, he proved to everyone. And now we all are happy that the murderer is gone. Shoshanas Yaakov. That's how the song went. And you're right. Now, there's more of a tendency now to try to, in preschool, protect the kids from those type of negative thinkings. I think the generations, in certain respects, and a lot of people have said this, are in a certain respect psychologically getting weaker. My parents' generation, the idea of going to a therapist or to a psychologist or psychiatrist was, oh my goodness, only if you're totally crazy. You were expected, if you were not seriously crazy, like seriously schizophrenic or seriously even depression, there was no treatment in my parents' generation for depression. There was no treatment. You were just told to, snap out of it. Get tough, snap out of it. And okay, maybe for some people that might have worked, but for others, looking back, there were people that needed serious intervention. Not medically any effective drugs were even available at that time for depression. But I see a lot of people today, especially young people now, and even little kids, where the minute there's any kind of problem, right away it's the therapist, right away it's the psychiatrist, right away it's the psychologist. And if you look at what's going on in nurses' offices, in the school systems, even when I was in college, there were some of our professors in education that at that time were getting very concerned about the amount of uppers and downers that young children were being placed on. And now the numbers are astronomical. I look around, I see so many kids now on all types of, uppers and downers and, psychotropic drugs. And I wonder, I've seen some situations where I think with a little help from their parents and maybe a little discussion, maybe a little more strain, maybe this kid could really work on getting it together for him or herself without immediately right away the therapist, right away the psychologist.
I actually agree with you on that. Like, I understand, and that's the conversation I was having with Ruthie about this whole idea of over-medicating children because parents and teachers are just lazy. You know, I because I remember I was a handful growing up. You know, I understand that. But the one thing I'm thankful for was I wasn't overly medicated, and also considered a problem. Because the biggest frustration I have, at least in the from schools and we've talked about this before, of the standard of discipline they expect from a child is astronomical. And if you step out of that line, you are ostracized or drugged up or thrown into some, nebuch school, as they would call it, And it's very frustrating because, these kids are just being kids and they have to have their adventures and their own personal experiences, and they're not doing anything. They're just staying, in line and not, I would say not breaking the rules, but not thinking for themselves or not doing anything that would be constructively creative because they're basically being drugged up to just be zombies. It's
I think in general, like children, if children are built naturally to run around and to play. As a matter of fact, people I know who live in New York had children whose growth was stunted, so they went to an endocrinologist, and the first 2 questions that the endocrinologist asked was, how often does your child run around outside in the sun or with the sun out or outside in the fresh air? And especially New York, where there's no such thing as a back lawn practically. It was like, not too much. They're inside most of the time, or they're sitting most of the time. This is not the way a child is built or is even supposed to be or is even healthy, because running around in the sun stimulates the thymus gland to produce more of the growth hormone.
Do you feel that when it comes to teaching children, do you have your own personal method that you've always wanted to try but never got around to using that you felt would be very helpful for growth emotionally and mentally?
Well, I remember when I did teach, when I was in New York and I was teaching 4th grade and then later on 7th grade. Before we started, the minute we got into the room, we did exercises before we even sat down. And in 7th grade, I would have the kids run around the room like 3 times everybody around the room, like in a line. Everybody run around the room. And the principal came in and said to me, why are you doing this? And I said, because this is good for them before we sit and learn, for them to run around a little bit.
So I guess if you had to create a class and a curriculum for, let's say, 5th grade boys, what would you do? Right? I'm making it a challenge for you.
Boys, I'm just thinking about that. Oh,
5th grade boys, you're teaching them, English.
English.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I was trying to advise one of your brothers got a job in the Satmar community.
Yeah.
Teaching the English subjects in the afternoon. It was like 2 hours of basic reading and math.
Yeah.
And needless to say, he was having a terrible time getting these kids to sit and pay attention, whatever. So I had an idea. I said, why don't you go approach some of the candy stores in the neighborhood and approach some of the pizza places in the neighborhood and ask them, hey, take this off of Meiser maybe. Could you give me, say, like little gift certificates for, say, like $1 worth of candy or 1 slice of pizza that I can use for, a reward, and see how many store people, will give you these little gift certificates for the kids, just, as rewards. I said, I bet there's a lot of people in the area, but there's a lot of, parents or a lot of store owners that wouldn't mind doing that. And you come in and you say, kids, okay, we're going to go out, do a point system. You get these many points. you get the certificate for a free slice of pizza, or you get the certificate for $1 worth of candy. And I said, and I bet you'll get those kids to really, sitting up and pay attention. And he did not take my advice. But I thought it would have been very, very helpful had he done that. Also, what I like to do is when I taught spelling, I would have the kids make up stories using the spelling words or funny sentences using the spelling words. And when I would give the spelling test, I would say to the kids, after the spelling test, do you want me to give, the way you give a spelling test is you say the word and then you put it in a sentence for the class and they write it down. That's a spelling test. At least that's the traditional way we did spelling tests. So I said, which do you want? Do you want just straight sentences or do you want a story? And most of the time they wanted the story. So I would take the spelling words instead of just saying with each sentence was another part of the story. Try to get like more creative. When I would do stencils for the kids to work on, like work papers, I would put like little funny cartoons in them. Like when I was teaching Hebrew school, I drew a picture of a crab and I had the crab saying, "It's not easy being Trafe."
That's cute. That's cute. So I think what it is, because we're almost out of time, but like I think what it is that I think parents need to put in the effort to be the entertainment or be the education, be that person. And I think a lot of parents are just tired because they have so much on their plate. And I think something's going to break, or people are just going to say we're done.
I'm not, no, I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea. If your child has a very, very serious problem, for sure, go to the experts, go to the therapist, the psychologist, psychiatrist. But I see too many people using that as the first line of defense.
Yeah.
Whereas there are other ways of you and the child working things out on their own.
Yeah. And that's what I was talking about in the beginning of our podcast, of just like, how much should we just let our child be a child with like very minimal intervention so they can, start developing their own thought process, ideas, learn how to solve problems, and then eventually come to various conclusions and just be their coach instead of this helicopter attitude. Like nowadays they have this thing where like people don't do sleepovers anymore, or when they do a sleepover, their kid is allowed to call them and just come home if they're uncomfortable, which there is a positive spin to that. If God forbid there's a situation, the kid knows that they can always just leave and they can always walk away from a problem. But I there's a part that also kind of feels like, there is that feeling when you're a kid of just missing your parents and kind of working through that problem of not being so homesick all the time, But I guess it's you'll have to, I guess we'll have to see in the future, 20 years from now, of how kids are being raised. Because I think that's also the thing is that I can look back at like the year 2000 and how kids were being raised, and we could see now of that wasn't good, that was good, you could do this, you should do that, and I think with nowadays we're slowly coming out of this sheltering, helicoptering kind of parent, but really trying to give independence in a positive way. And also there's a lot of information nowadays, more than ever before. That's the other experience I think parents are having now.
Yeah, I think as I see the generations going, I think child raising is improving. I really do. I see your generation. I see a lot of the parents that really are doing with each generation. I think they're doing better and better.
Yeah. Can you give me a quick example? We're almost out of time.
Just the fact that parents seem to be more with talking things out with their kids.
Yes, that's a big thing nowadays, is talking the problem out, which I agree with 100%. When I was younger, I always got frustrated when you or Tati would like just, of course, your parents being parents, but they're like yelling and screaming at me for doing something. I'm like, if you just explained it to me, I would understand it. And sometimes I remember asking you, or more like less like Tati and sometimes other adults as a kid, I'd ask them a question. They wouldn't really respond to me. They would just like give me a dumb look and like walk away. And I think that would be more of like, it's because I asked a question that they don't have the answer to, but they want to save face.
There's also, I have that a lot of times with people where they think I don't understand what they said, but I do understand, except that I was interpreting it a different way, especially like, like, for instance, like somebody says, oh, that green book in the back. Well, there's a couple green books. Back where? Right? To the left? To the middle? And to
Yeah.
them, it was obvious. But I said, I heard what you said, but I interpreted it this way. And they have a tendency to lose patience with me.
Yeah, I think it's just because some people just want you to get it right away, and they don't have time to explain, or they need to deal with other situations. Because I remember having that when I was first starting out in the workplace, and I'd be asking a question, or I wouldn't understand something, or I was trying to grasp a concept, and I would think to myself, like, well, these people are very well experienced. They have 20, 30 years under the belt. They'll definitely answer this question right away. And I asked that question, and they're like, are you an idiot? Like, how do you not know the answer? I'm like, I was just trying to figure out what was going on. I didn't realize this was such a obvious, conclusion. And, looking back, like, I realized, like, I was just learning, and they just didn't have the patience for me. And that's really what it was. They don't have like they claim, a lot of places were claiming, like, oh, we're a learning office. Like, no, you're not. We don't want you to we want you to pick this up by yourself, do everything yourself, be as independent as possible. If you ask a question, it better be a good one, and it better be impressive. It better make me look good. So you better like shape up or ship out.
Another problem too is a lot of times people who are like very, very brilliant get things right away, non-verbally. And if you ask them to explain it, they don't have the tools to explain it. I had a friend who her job was to write up a manual of the way certain weaponry worked. And she said when she spoke to these generals to try to figure out how to write up this.
Thank you for listening to Jewish Boy Calls His Mother. Please comment and subscribe on our Facebook page, YouTube channel, and Instagram. I would greatly appreciate it, and my mother would too.